It's been a month since a gunman opened fire in Dayton's Oregon district, killing 9 and wounding 27 innocent people. Just the day before, 22 were killed at an El Paso, Texas Walmart. The horror of mass shootings has touched communities across the country, leading many to demand action.
Do I think that we're going to see another mass shooting tomorrow or Friday? Probably, because Washington will not move.
But exactly what is the action that should be taken? We look for answers to this complex issue as we explore mass shootings, solutions for a safer community.
Welcome to a special edition of WHIO Reports. Our focus, mass shootings, solutions for a safer community. I'm Jim Oddie. We're taking a look back at the Oregon district shooting 1 month ago to remember what happened, to look at where we are now, and to set a course for the future. Throughout the next hour, we'll hear from Ohio Governor Mike DeWine, Dayton Mayor Nan Whaley, and other guests about what we've learned from this tragedy and what we can do now to try to prevent violence in the future. I want to start out first in our first segment from a report from News Center 7's John Bedell. He's showing us what happened that night at the Oregon district and in the hours that followed the shooting. John.
Just after 1 a.m., the shots rang out, leaving 9 people dead plus the shooter. There were dozens injured. Police identified the shooter as 24-year-old Connor Betts from Bellbrook. He came armed with an assault-style weapon with more than 100 rounds of ammunition and was wearing body armor. It took 24 seconds for police to shoot and kill Betts just inches before he entered Ned Pepper's. The biggest question remaining was, why would someone do this? Why take the lives of 9 innocent people?
We are very early into this investigation. Any suggestion at this time of motive would be irresponsible. We do not have sufficient information to answer the question that everyone wants to know. Why?
In the days that followed, police and the FBI looked for answers. It included a search of the gunman's home. He acted alone. But unlike the El Paso shooting, authorities have not said whether Betts left a manifesto or stream of social media to indicate what might have caused him to turn violent. Police were able to map out his steps just prior to and during the shooting, saying he was trying to enter Ned Pepper's when police intercepted him and took him down. Mayor Nan Whaley and others credited quick police action with saving countless lives. And for this community, still struggling from the aftermath of the Memorial Day tornadoes, the mayor says it's another opportunity for this city to show its grit.
I think that is what makes us so strong and continues to make us resilient. And so I think that describes Dayton and its people in a way that I'm very, very proud of.
In the weeks that followed the shooting and the funerals of the victims, the city has come together in ways we've never seen before. The focus now is to find some way to make sure, as best we can, this never happens again, here or anywhere else. In the News Center, I'm John Bedell, WHIO.
Thank you, John. I want to introduce our special guest in the program here now, Ohio Governor Mike DeWine, Dayton Mayor Nan Whaley, and also in this segment, we'll be joined by Dayton Police Chief Richard Beal. So thanks for being with us. I want to start with a question for each one of our guests here tonight. Just take 1 minute. It's the impossible question. Have we learned anything in the last month that would really help us prevent this in the future? Governor, I'll start with you.
Well, Jim, I think that there's clearly some things that we can do. 2 days after this horrible tragedy, I presented 17 points, asked the legislature to act on them. We're working on language right now. These are things that, look, we can't ever guarantee that this will never happen again, but what we can do is do things that we know will matter, things that will save lives, things that will make us safer. And I think we have a very good package which we presented to the state legislature, and frankly, I would like for them to act on that package as a package, because all the things that we have presented are constitutional. All the things we have presented will make a difference. All of them, I think, can be passed by this legislature.
Mayor Whaley.
Yeah, I think we've learned a lot, and we've seen a tremendous amount of change just in the conversation around common sense gun legislation in the 30 days. From the governor's proposals to Congressman Turner announcing that he's for an assault weapons ban, someone who has an A rating from the NRA making those motions, I think is really important. Do we need more? Yes, we need more people like Governor DeWine and Congressman Turner coming and standing up, and I hope we find that in the coming weeks and months.
So, Chief Beal, have we really learned all that much that we didn't know in the first maybe 42, 72 hours that might help?
Well, I think we confirmed some things. Clearly, police deployment matters. Police training matters. Police being properly equipped matters. and police being able to act immediately or promptly matters. We also, I think, have underscored that gun regulation matters, and there are loopholes now that create vulnerabilities. Magazine capacity matters. So there's a number of, I think, learnings, and we need to really explore those more deeply.
Now that you've had the advantage of being able to look at the evidence from the scene and all that's been gathered so far without revealing anything that might hurt that investigation, anything really new in this that might help us prevent something like this in the future, either about the gunman or the weapon or something that happened in this process?
Well, I think if we look at what's happened since, which is a number of key arrests have been made with individuals who were expressing some propensity for violence and who were heavily armed, and to immediately intervening and getting ahead of these horrible incidents is crucial. So we're being much more proactive. You see law enforcement across the country, various areas, being on the more preventive end by taking intervention before a mass shooting occurs. That's where we really need to be. Now these other issues we need to also address because they create a vulnerability for it to happen.
Over the last couple of days, we've been soliciting questions from our viewers and listeners on Facebook, Instagram, and some other places in social media. And I want to go to one of those questions now. Stephanie sent us a message on Instagram that asked, okay, well, what would background checks do? Could they prevent violent attacks? What does the data show us? And by background checks, I mean more comprehensive background checks. Governor, you talked about that just recently. Would the legislature go along with that, and what would you require with better background checks?
Jim, I think background checks do matter. Most gun purchases in Ohio do have a background check, but there are some that do not. We believe that we can come up with a proposal for the state legislature that is constitutional and that will, in fact, be able to see if someone cannot pass that background check, they should not have a gun. Now, the other thing that we have to do, and we're starting to do this, and we have a proposal to do this, is to make sure our criminal record system is better than it is today. Too often you can run someone, and the chief knows this, you can run someone in the criminal record system and they come up, well, they were arrested, they were charged with such and such, and then there's no final disposition. And so under the current law, even if there is, even if they're with a federal firearms person that's selling this and they have to have that background check, in 3 days, if it's not back from the data, then they go ahead and sell that gun. So we got to improve the system. Second thing we've got to do is outstanding warrants. We have I put a working group together a number of months ago to look at the whole issue of outstanding warrants. Over 500,000 outstanding warrants in the state of Ohio. Now, they're not all dangerous, but many of these individuals are. Out of that 500,000, only 18,000 are today entered into the national into the national database. And so what that means is if somebody goes across the line into Indiana and gets pulled over and the police officer runs that person, he may not be in that system. We got to change that, and we're going to change that.
Chief Beal, about a minute before the break, how much would that help you?
Well, I go back to, we need to know as much as we can about individuals who represent potential threats. So basically, gaps in records is not helpful. Having individuals who are not subject to a thorough background check isn't helpful. It creates vulnerability. Every one of those gaps creates a vulnerability and another potentiality that this can happen again.
Yeah. So, Mayor, from the city's point of view, though, you want as many of these gaps filled.
Correct.
Anything else? Could the city do anything?
Well, the city's preempted, unfortunately, for most any gun issues, like I think 43 states in the country now. So we look always at opportunities where we can use legislation, lawsuits, et cetera, to try to work on these issues for our community. But certainly, both from the state's perspective and federal, there are opportunities to close these loopholes on background checks, and it's something that is very, very popular. I've been saying there's not many things in Ohio where 9 out of 10 Ohioans agree. I don't even think they all agree on the Ohio State Buckeyes, which is kind of a miracle. I don't think we can get 9 out of 10 there, but we can get 9 out of 10 on background checks. So we just need the legislature to do this common sense action.
Very good. We'll take a break here. Thank you, Chief, for being with us on our special program at WHI Reports. Thanks for your work in the community here. When we come back from the break, we'll talk about the community response to this on the trauma side of this. Our medical expert is with us in just 2 minutes. Stay with us. Welcome back to this special edition of WHIO Reports. Thanks for being with us. I'm Jim Oddie. We're talking with Ohio Governor Mike DeWine and Dayton Mayor Nan Whaley about mass shootings, solutions for a safer community. Joining us in this segment of the program, Dr. William Marriott of Premier Health. Doctor, thanks for being with us. From your point of view, what's your gauge on how the medical community responded, especially not just that night, the night of the shootings, but in the days that followed? It seemed like an incredible effort on not just Premier, but everybody. So many people got involved in this.
Well, first of all, I'd like to express my condolences to the families. It's been a month, and I can't imagine how they're still hurting. As far as how the medical community responded, that began on that scene. The Dayton police, of course, did an exemplary job, but what people don't know and may not be aware of, they also rendered medical care that night. They placed a number of tourniquets accurately and effectively, so they provided medical care that night as well, followed by our Dayton Fire paramedics and firefighters who also rendered aid. So the medical care started at the scene, and that's not by mistake. That's through years of training and practice. So I believe lives were saved, not just by gunfire, but through the rendering of aid that night by our first responders. As a level 1 trauma center, however, we do see gun violence. This is not necessarily new. I believe it's becoming a bit more acute. I think it is a public health crisis, and I do believe it's time that we look for solutions, because what we're doing now does not seem to be working.
I want to talk about the broader impact here, not just for the victims and for those family members, but for anyone in their circle, in their universe of life. It's not just about them, it's about all those other lives that are touched in this. How does the community handle that from your point of view? This is much bigger than just those people who were there that night.
Absolutely is. I think we have continued to offer support to our staff and to the first responders that were involved. Certainly, they get a lot of comfort from peer counseling as well. They help each other. We continue to encourage one another, and to the extent we can, we encourage the community. I was present at the Gem City Shine event, manned the Premier Health First Aid tent, and it was a wonderful event, and there was a clear sense of community there. It truly was Dayton strong, and I think it's that type of feeling of community that will help us go forward.
And like Dr. Marriott was talking about at these tents, we also had mental health advocates at those tents, and so really we've been working heavily with Public Health Dayton and Adamus to make sure that we have those places where people can feel comfortable to make sure that they can reach out to get the help they need, especially on things like this, a 30-day, a month later, we see that is a trigger for folks, or the shooting in Odessa, another trigger for folks every single time one of these actions happen. And really, trying to take away the stigma around mental health that, you need to get help. That's part of being Dayton strong. It is completely normal for this to affect you. This is a normal reaction, and so it's okay to go and seek help, and we need people to do that.
Okay, so Governor DeWine, how do you get past that stigma? How do you get families to step forward? Because in a lot of these shootings, family members were well aware that that person had a problem ongoing or maybe a temporary situation. They also knew that those people had access to weapons. How do you get the family members to get beyond the stigma, not be afraid to step forward and seek some kind of help?
Jim, I think we have to give family members a clear pathway legally to do this. My experience has been as a prosecutor and as the Attorney General that we saw many, many tragic cases where family members wanted to do something. They told people that there was a problem, but they really didn't know what to do. So what you mentioned at the beginning of the show, what we are calling in our 17-point proposal, a personal protection order. Some people refer to it as a red flag. We don't like to do that because, frankly, we have built in a very significant due process in taking this gun, separating this individual from the gun. But family members are usually the ones who know what's going on. And so what our proposal would do would allow family members or the police to institute a process. What would then happen is that person would get notice that they had to go into court. They would go into court, and the people who were saying that this person had a problem, that they were dangerous to themselves or dangerous to the public, would then have to prove that. But that is a pathway that families could use. We all have seen examples of somebody who everybody in the community looks up and says, well, that guy's a ticking time bomb. Something's going to go off. This guy's going to, you know, he's got guns, he's got a mental health problem, or he's an alcoholic, or he's a long-term drug addict. That combination is not good. So we got to give them a pathway to do that. We provide for a hearing within 3 days, due process, but separating that person, even if it's only for a short period of time, is very significant. The other thing our proposal does is it guarantees that that person is going to get some help. And so we can't just separate them. We got to try to help them and give them the help that they frankly need.
One of the questions that came from our listeners and viewers, and this also came from Facebook, Ted is talking about, when will you do anything that is substantially addressing the public health epidemic of gun violence? Doctor, how do you approach that from the medical side of this? How do you approach this without violating so many people's constitutional rights? How do you do that? How do you begin to solve not just the problem of mass shootings, but the daily violence that happens in a lot of communities all over Ohio?
It's simply a matter of keeping the wrong people from obtaining guns. That's much easier said than done, obviously. We need a more robust mental health system. We have wonderful mental health professionals, but we simply don't have enough resources to meet the need. I think that's very clear. From 25 years in the emergency department, I can tell you that's abundantly clear. So we need, first of all, to beef up the mental health system. I think there has to be some fundamental change in how information is shared regarding those who do have mental issues that would disqualify them from having firearms. Obviously, those connections are not being made. So that would be some of my first thoughts.
Okay, Jim, I think
Yes.
Doctor's absolutely. Well, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
No. I think Doctor's absolutely right. Everything he said is spot on. The only thing I would add to that is what you see in every city in the state and across this country is that you see gun violence that is occurring. Over a week's time, you see innocent victims, 5-year-old, 7-year-old, 9-year-old, who is killed. And what we know from the data is, and I'm sure if the chief were here, he could confirm that, most of the violent crime is committed by a very small percentage of the criminal element. And so what we have to do is to give the police, give the prosecutors what they need, and that is when someone has been convicted of a violent offense once, twice, 3 times, when they've been convicted of that violent offense and they have a gun in their possession, we need to be able to send them away for a long time and frankly just segregate them from the community. I bet if you ask the chief how many people in Dayton, if he could get rid of 30 people, I bet he could probably name them. And you know, we're not going to violate anyone's due process, but someone who has been told time and time again you're not allowed to have a gun and who persists in having a gun, when we find them with a gun, we need to get them out of the community.
Dan Whaley.
Well, I think too, this with what the doctor was talking about, it being a public health epidemic, is something that we've actually been working on at the city even before this mass shooting, because we see these kind of issues with guns across our community in smaller and issues that don't get as much coverage, frankly. And so our Human Relations Council has been working with Public Health Dayton about how we create that system in place to treat this as a public health crisis. That's what this gun epidemic is. And so we need these great, efforts like the governor's doing, but we also need to change the culture in our community around common sense gun use. And so those are the two things that kind of come together.
In public policy, though, that's called a very heavy lift, if not an mission impossible.
Sure.
We have to take a break here. When we come back, thank you, Dr. Marriott, for being with us on the program here. When we come back from the break, we're going to talk about the social service side of this thing, reaching beyond the bounds of local government, state government, the feds as well, but those people are working every day on some of these many issues in the community. Stay with us here at WHIO Reports. We'll be back in just a minute. with us here at WHI Reports, the special edition. Ohio Governor Mike DeWine, Dayton Mayor Nan Whaley joining us now. Shannon Isom, the CEO of the Dayton YWCA, thanks for being with us to discuss the aftermath of the Oregon District shooting and what we can do going forward. Is there a way to find something or some things that we can do to prevent future violence? So thanks for being with us. Shannon, in your experience working with those people who've been around family violence many decades, okay, what have we learned from this situation or others that might help us prevent violence in the future?
Unfortunately, Jim, those that work in this field around family violence already know the signs, and we see them often. So when we saw this mass shooting, what we do know is that the gun violence associated with mass violence is also associated with women violence and gender violence more specifically. So what we see is that since 2011, through all mass shootings, 80% of those, or excuse me, a third of those, have a history of violence against women. We also know that out of that third, that 80% of them have cases against them of domestic violence. They have a history, 30% or so have a history of stalking, and 50% specifically have violence that have been around intimate violence against women. So we think that there is not only a link, but if we start listening to women more, and that we respond as a state and as a community around the violence against women, that we also will see sure signs of somewhat these mass shootings and what gun violence that we also see in communities.
So we've seen all these patterns, patterns not just in the Dayton shooting, but El Paso and some that have all come, even in school shootings sometimes involving adults. You see these patterns, so how do we get, whether it's the Highway Patrol or BCI or local police, Mayor, how do you get those to be recognized by local police agencies and then have the ability to act on them? Can you?
Well, I think, you know, this whole idea of trust women is a really important subset of this conversation. And, you know, that's, I think, a culture shift, frankly, that our community is undergoing, not only for police officers, but for the community as a whole. You know, the stories that's come out this past 30 days of the shooter in Dayton have been stories of women who have tried to go to local law enforcement and said, this guy is a problem. And we have to do a better job of listening to that all across the board.
So Shannon, what do you tell women specifically, but other people, about this situation? They're in that kind of a trap. They don't oftentimes want to speak out because that has ramifications for them. How do you counsel women? What advice can you give to them who are caught in this?
We have a 24-hour agency, as most communities do within the state of Ohio, where we have crisis call. We respond to walk-ins. We're there 24 hours, 365 days a year, and we are the safety net for women. I think the real question is, what do we tell women of not being those that are victimized, of how to protect themselves? How do we speak life and truth into our community that perpetrators have to stop perpetrating? And we have to stop holding victims accountable to not being victimized. So I would say that although that we tell women where to go to be safe, and we do that, I think it's really important to have this conversation about how we stop violence in our community.
We'll have to leave it right there when we take another break. Now, when we come back, we're going to get into a little bit more discussion, Governor, of some of your proposals, especially at the State House, what might be able to be done going forward to stop this from happening again. Stay with us here in WHI Reports.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Our community has honored those killed, comforted the wounded, and consoled each other. The people of Dayton have rallied together, but as the vigils and the fundraisers wind down, many continue to call for action. So what's next?
We must do something. And that is exactly what we are going to do.
We look at what's being proposed to keep these tragedies from happening again, as Mass Shootings, Solutions for a Safer Community continues.
Welcome back to this special edition of WHI Reports. I'm Jim Otte. Thanks for being with us. Our focus is mass shootings, solutions for a safer community. With the help of our guests, we're taking a look back at the Oregon District tragedy 1 month ago. Plus, there's been so much that's happened since then, and we're looking to the future to try to prevent this from ever happening again. I want to open this segment with a report from News Center 7's Molly Kowick. She's here to show us what the community has gone through since the shootings and how we're moving forward. Molly.
Stand by me. Within hours after the Oregon District shooting, people of the Miami Valley came together. They released white doves and fought back tears as they hugged, remembering the victims and the violence that erupted in the Oregon District.
This is my town, and this is where I hang out and with my friends. I mean, it could have been my friends, it could have been me and my family.
When Governor Mike DeWine took to the stage, the crowd chanted, "Do something!" Kayla Mosley is a Wright State graduate who went to school with Megan Betts, one of the victims and sister of the gunman. Kayla and others came here to denounce violence and reclaim the Oregon District for peace.
This is our space, and you can't take that from us.
And then at the Gem City Shine Block Party hosted by Dave Chappelle, the community came together once again. Comedian Jon Stewart made a surprise appearance.
Dayton, Ohio, you have reclaimed this area with love, with hope.
And the crowd showed how the community has come together as one.
It's just amazing, and I think that we together as a community are really growing and recovering from this unspeakable tragedy.
So much peace, so much togetherness. The music is amazing.
Also that weekend, a music-filled prayer event that saw Chappelle, along with musician Kanye West, urge the crowd to take it upon themselves to be an agent for change.
The best way that we can honor our fallen is by getting up better than we were before. We will not let those people die in vain. They are our heroes. They are our martyrs. This is our city. Gem City, shine, let them know.
Organizers of those events say the challenge moving forward is to keep up that same sense of unity, that commitment to peace, and make something happen to stop the violence. Molly Kowick, WHIO.
Thank you, Molly. Ohio Governor Mike DeWine, Dayton Mayor Nan Whaley are also with us again this segment. Joining us in the program now is psychologist Dr. Randy Welton of Wright State University. Doctor, thanks for being with us. The $64 million question at this point that everybody wants to hear your answer to this is, can a person or persons at this point or in the future, from a psychological point of view, can you tell if they have a propensity, if they have an interest, if they have a direction towards violence, either against themselves or somebody else? Can you tell in advance?
I would love to be able to answer yes, that there is some specific way of discovering that, but unfortunately the answer is no. We can put people into risk groups. We can look for those warning factors that put people at higher risk for violence. For example, a previous history of violence is one of the biggest risk factors. Past behavior predicts future behavior. Substance abuse, as has been mentioned already, puts people at a greatly elevated risk category. So does making threats. So we can put people at higher risks. We can observe them more closely, but to look at a large population and to pick out which are the one or two people who are likely to commit acts of violence, we just really can't do effectively.
I want to go back to something the governor had talked about before, the red flag law or safety protection order law. Governor, is it possible to get that passed through the legislature, this legislature? And secondly, can you do that and still protect people's Second Amendment rights? So many people have contacted us prior to this program and said that's never going to be possible. This won't pass constitutional muster. How can you do that?
We're going to do something that's not been done before, Jim. 17 states have passed so-called similar red flag legislation. We don't even use that term because we want people to understand that this has due process built into it. Indiana, for example, passed. Then Governor Pence signed a bill that had an effect, but it doesn't have the due process, frankly, that our bill will have. So our bill has due process built into it all the way through, but it also will work and will provide people with a pathway, a family member or the police. You always hear the stories, well, somebody ought to do something about so-and-so over there. He's got a gun. Well, we are somebody now. We have an obligation to do that. And as governor, I have an obligation to present to the General Assembly a bill that is constitutional, a bill that will make a difference, and a bill that's got a good shot at getting passed. And we're going to do that.
Okay, so, Doctor, could this work?
When we look at preventing kind of any type of violence, especially mass violence, we can look at 3 different levels. The first is universal prevention, and that would be things like if you see something, tell someone. So an increased awareness of letting people know if there are threats being made or suspicious behavior. More complete criminal background checks would be also a universal prevention effort that would be helpful. The next level are selective prevention efforts, and that's treating people in those high-risk groups. So more actively and aggressively treating people with substance abuse, looking for those people who feel alienated or disenfranchised from society and helping include them. What we're describing now are called indicated prevention strategies, which are looking at those people who have made threats, people who have a history of violence, doing a more intensive evaluation and intervention. And that would seem to be the way to go ahead. The specifics have to be worked out, but that general approach seems to be the best thing to try.
Okay, Jim, the other thing that this will do, and the states that have done this have seen drops in suicide. So if you can separate that person from a gun, now they could kill themselves some other way, I understand that, but the chances they're going to use a gun and not kill themselves aren't very good.
Right.
And so they make a quick decision and it's all over. So you're going to save people. And again, it's families that usually are the ones, my experience is families are the ones, doctor, that usually come forward and say, what am I going to do? What am I going to do with my loved one here? And what we see time and time again is because they don't feel they have an avenue, they don't have a way to separate guns from that individual who may be an alcoholic, maybe a drug addict, maybe have mental health problems, maybe is off their meds, Lord knows what's going on, and they can't do anything, and so the person ends up dying, or a police officer dies, or an innocent person ends up dying. So doctor's absolutely right. We can't, there's no way to predict, and there's no way to guarantee that any of the things we're going to do will work in a particular case. I mean, I get questions all the time from people who say, well, would your proposal have stopped the Dayton tragedy? I don't think, with all due respect, that's the question. The question is, will it save lives? Will it make a difference? Will it lessen the chance that we have a loved one, you and I have a loved one, or our viewers have a loved one who gets killed because of violence? And all these things that we're proposing are constitutional. They all will work. They all will make things better.
Doctor, before we take the break here, I want to have you talk just for a minute about some of those warning signs of trouble ahead, whether that person may become violent against others or themselves. Family members who are listening and watching and reading about all of this, what should they be looking for here? Take just 1 minute.
Sure. So increased isolation, a change in normal behavior. So someone who had been formerly fairly social who is now isolating themselves, not spending time with family, not spending time with friends. Obviously threatening behavior or overtly making threats, increased use of substances. Those would be the primary things to watch for in the short term.
Okay, and Mayor, just take 30 seconds to get your take on this. I see you nodding a lot through a lot of this, but do you believe in this enough that this can make the difference?
Well, I think the governor's package of the 17 pieces are really key, and I'm glad he's doing them as a package together, because the safety protection order is important, but also our background checks, and they fit together, and I think that's what's really, really important. It all has to go.
We'll take another break here, Doctor. Thank you for your help on the program here. When we come back, we'll talk with people who are living with this situation day in and day out, a business leader from the Oregon District. Stay with us here on WHIO Reports. In case you just joined us here at WHIO Reports, this is a special edition. We're focusing on the Oregon District mass shootings, solutions for a safer community. Ohio Governor Mike DeWitt is with us, also Dayton Mayor Nan Whaley. They're in studio with us now. Joining us on this segment of the program, Andy Rowe. He's the manager of Blind Bob's. Thanks for being with us. I've been by there so many times. You must feel good about this situation in the aftermath that so many people have taken the time, the effort to purposely come to the Oregon District and not let this tragedy change their behavior. They want to show their support.
Yeah, we've sort of been overwhelmed with the community support that's sort of come down, and for some people it might have been a while since they'd been down to the district, but they're coming down there reconnecting. It is a place where people gather to have fun and meet and connect with each other. So, and people are anxious to make sure we don't lose that sense of community in there.
From the business side of things, I think the fear is not just in Dayton, but in so many of these communities that wherever the shooting happens, wherever that violence comes, that people will stay away in droves. But that Sunday night, so many people were down there for the rally. Mayor, I know you were there. Governor, you were there. I was there early on. What did that mean to you, Andy? To have the people there?
It was important to sort of come together and process what we did and what we had experienced as a community. It was important to have the mayor there and the governor there, and I think the mayor did a great job of keeping the focus on the people that we had lost, and sort of focusing on making sure that people knew that we are a community and we're all going to have to lift each other up to get through this.
So on stage, for those people who don't remember it or did not see the news coverage, the governor is giving a great speech and talking I think, in a heartfelt message. People started to chant from the crowd, do something, do something, do something. Governor, what goes through your head at that moment, and how did that influence you?
Well, I told the mayor said something to me afterwards, and I said, look, I understand this. If I was out in that crowd, I would be angry and I would want something done. So I fully understood what they were saying. The things that we announced 2 days later, Jim, I told the mayor, many of these things, such as the personal protection order, we've been working on for three and a half months. But, a tragedy like this focuses you. And it's time when a tragedy like this occurs, you put everything together, you put it together as a package and put it out there. And this is the time, and this is the time for us to move forward. I tell you, one of the fears I have, is that if you're not from the Dayton area, and this is, the natural, somebody said it takes about 3 weeks and people stop remembering. And they remember, but it's not there every single day. So my only point is, we should not forget. We cannot forget. We have to have something positive come out of this tragedy. These individuals who died, there has to be something good out of that. As horrible as it is, and it's incumbent upon those of us in office to try to get something done and to get something done.
Okay, so Mayor, you've seen other issues come across like this all across the country. Now it's at your doorstep. How important is it to take advantage of this momentum in public policy to really make that change? Because if you don't do it this year, you may never see anything.
Well, I'm very aware of that, and the governor, I talk about that regularly, that, we're thinking about it every day in Dayton, and we're still living this, and we will for a very long time. But people across the rest of the state are saying, what do you mean Dayton, right? So it's already going away. So I think time is of the essence on this, and so I appreciate a fast action by the governor on these plans to really work this as aggressively as possible through the legislature. And then, look, we have to really do our job to advocate to the legislature as well that this is very, very important, and that the people of Dayton, and I mean the Dayton region, are not going to forget this. And so this is an issue that has bubbled to the top for us when it comes to state legislative action. I also just want to say how incredibly proud I am of the business district of the Oregon District. It is very difficult what these folks of local business owners have gone through, not only with the shooting that was the pinnacle of a very tough summer. If you think about the Klan rally affecting business, the tornadoes, which kept their water off, so they weren't able really to do business, and then this terrible, terrible tragedy right in their front door. The way that these small businesses have come together, have worked together, have made decisions together, it's just a pleasure to get to work with them, and they understand how important the space is for the entire community, and so we're really lucky to have such great leadership there.
Andy, do you have any special insight from the business side of this thing? You have to live this and have for the last month, and will probably for the rest of your career, saying, I know where I was that night. I know what that did to our business and our district. Any special insight as to what you think might be able to happen here in a positive way moving forward?
One of the most heartening things is seeing Governor DeWine and Mike Turner, who used to be the mayor, a Republican mayor in a blue city, move a little bit on these kinds of issues. Even though they're under a lot of political pressure, I don't think they enjoy the political calculus that they are within. They want to see something change about this. And prior to this, I wasn't necessarily aligned with the governor very often, but I know that he has an ally in me when it comes to campaigning against I think there's 24 Republican state lawmakers that we're really going to have to bring it to their attention and say, you know, we need this. And it's not just, it's not a partisan issue. Something has to change. And if the governor puts his weight behind it, I think it can happen. So.
Okay, so how do you pull this off, Governor? You started with an announcement of a very, very detailed, very comprehensive plan that reaches in a lot of different directions all at once, but that doesn't make it happen. That gets it started. How do you get it through the legislature?
Jim, it's a process. It's a process of working with individual legislators, letting them know what the language is. We're now to the point when we're starting to share the language. We've got that worked out. And really just working with them as we move forward. Look, legislators want to do the right thing, but I think that what our message to the legislators is, look, this is constitutional. This does not violate anyone's Second Amendment rights. We're doing it different in Ohio. Ohio does it different. We're going to do this different than it's been done in other states. We're going to do it so that people who are really focused on the Second Amendment, and they have every right to do that, will say, look, I'm okay with this. This is going to be okay, and it's going to get something positive done. So it's a process. We're working the process.
Mayor, I could just see you telling people we cannot wait for Congress to take action because that is a much heavier lift in here because they're so entrenched. But maybe something, I want to test your level of optimism here, and I will before we end the program. The fact that something can get through the legislature. You know Ohio very well. It's tough.
Well, I don't know Ohio as well as the governor does, right? So I'll say that I know Dayton and the Dayton region well. And I'll say this, you know, when the governor called 2 days after and said, or the next day and said, hey, I'm going to move forward this work, he said, I'm not going to, you know, I'm going to get something that we can get through the legislature. And so I think that's important. This is about getting stuff done. It's not about pontificating, which we see a lot right now in politics, but it's about action and consensus and coming together to move forward. And so that's why I'm hopeful in the State House. I know it's going to be a big lift even there. You know, I think we're going to do everything we can in the State House. But I think, too, I want to say I'm not letting Congress off the hook either. I'll be there next week with mayors to get the Senate to just have an up or down vote on background checks, because there are national answers to this, too, that need to be held accountable. It shouldn't all just be on Ohio's back.
So, Andy, just before we take a break here, as they craft that message to reach across the aisle, to talk to their people who perhaps were not in favor of this a couple of months ago, what advice would you give to them? They're trying to sell this that would help not just you, but really all of us here.
It's not just listening to the elected officials. It's important to have the mayors there lobbying for this change and governors, but also listen to law enforcement. The Dayton Police Department has been working with my business for 11 years to make sure that public safety is something we focus on, whether that's the big Halloween event or just regular weekend events with the bar safe training that they have with the bar managers and restaurants. Listen to what the police chiefs want, because they're the ones that are in the trenches.
Right.
Very good. Thank you, Eddie. Thanks for being with us on this portion of the program. We'll be back in just a minute here on WHIO Reports.